I've just come back from a 21-day safari into Zambia and Botswana. This year alone, I've spent 70 days in the field photographing wildlife. And over that time, I've found there are 5 setups or techniques that are critical for good wildlife photography. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. My name is Shem Compion. I'm a professional photographer and the managing director of C4 Photo Safaris. I have traveled the globe with a camera as my passport. Yet, Africa remains my muse. And today, I'm going to share with you 5 critical camera techniques and setups that improve your wildlife photography. The reason I say that these techniques are critical is because, like so many things in life, it's the 80-20 principle. 80% of your great wildlife images are going to come from 20% of application. And the first one of those is support. With wildlife photography, the humble beanbag is probably the most essential item that you can have. But there are many more aspects to it. The tripod, of course, is the best one you can use. However, in Africa, we're often working from a moving vehicle. That means the tripod has to be shifted around within a confined space, making it more difficult and cumbersome to work with. And therein comes the beanbag. The beanbag is versatile. It can be moved from place to place. It can be put on the ground. It can be rested on a bar. Importantly, though, is that once your camera is nestled in to the actual beanbag, it provides a brilliant dampening effect on the camera and the long lens that you have here. And that is critical for getting very sharp photographs in low light situations and providing stability for you to view your subject with, ensuring consistent sharpness through your images. Now, with the new lighter lenses and mirrorless cameras, stability has changed somewhat in the sense that beanbags are not used as often. However, support still remains critical, and that means you are the support. Now, that sounds like a contradiction in terms, but very often we find ourselves hand-holding the camera and hand-holding the lens whilst we are photographing wildlife. And that could be if there's birds in flight or there's fast action and you're panning with the subject. The critical part here is that you being the support here means that you need to be set and comfortable and supporting the camera correctly. And there's certain ways to do that. The first way to do that is to ensure that when you're photographing handheld with a long lens, you firstly lock your elbow close to your body, providing some good support within your body. And that allows you to use this vertical as a strong support system for you and your lens. There's a second very important aspect to that. And this is if you're sitting in a vehicle or you're standing and panning, and you're not using a traditional tripod or a beanbag, and that is to make sure that your body is facing to the end direction of where your subject is moving towards. So if my subject is moving from my left across the frame to the right here, I want to be standing facing this way, starting to pan there and moving across like this, so that when I get to the critical part of where I want to photograph, I am balanced. So that is what I mean when I talk about being well supported in your handheld position. You don't want to be facing this way, starting panning, and as you get to the critical part of photographing, now you're off balance. And that is where you're going to lose your tracking and where you're going to lose the subject out of your frame. So positioning your vehicle and positioning yourself with you standing to face where your subject is moving towards. If you've got impala running across the front of your vehicle, it could be as simple as sitting yourself in this position and panning with them so that as you get to the action part of the pan, you are balanced. Number 2, your focus point selection. This has become even more critical as technology has improved over the years. In the old days, we pretty much had only one option for focusing, and that was a little focus selector button in the center of the frame that sometimes could move up, down, left and right. It then improved to grouping, where you could select groups of areas around the camera, and now it's transformed as we've moved into mirrorless cameras. The digital frames that we have means that you have a variety of options to use for focusing, and that's critical to wildlife photography. There are a number of scenarios that come into play when you want to photograph good wildlife and birds with your focus points. I'm going to run through them right now. The first is, you do not need to use and have access to all of the focus points. My camera gives me about 9 different options, and I only need about 4. So if you are able, through your camera menu, you can deselect the ones you don't need, giving you quicker access to the ones that you do need. The second point here is that certain focus points are good for certain scenarios. Eye tracking is very handy and works really well when you've got a subject that is close to you and without any distractions. Those distractions could be trees, could be bushes, it could be vehicles in front of a person. Those distractions pull the eye tracking away from the subject, either resulting in a slightly blurry image or the actual tracking losing the subject completely. And so eye tracking, I find, in wildlife photography is not the best focus point to use. It can be used in scenarios where there is a clear subject and there's no distractions. I like to use different ones in order to get consistently strong results. Pinpoint tracking, for example, is very good to be able to focus through grass, through leaves, in order to get to your subject in the back. If you've got a subject walking through grass, the tracking normally will focus on the grass in the foreground. And so having the smallest pinpoint focus point to be able to select the subject in the background is very, very critical with wildlife photography. Of course, we want our subject to be tack sharp. When you've got animals and action, I like to use the center focus point with a grouping around it. This is what we call the safety net option, where you've got a lot of action going on, the subject is moving around quite a bit through the frame, and this tracks the subject, but if the subject moves away from your tracking point, the safety net, the options around it, are also active and ready to be tracking your subject as it moves around that. And then lastly, the group focus point. The mid-sized focus point is really handy for photographing birds in flight. If you have a tiny focus point, to try and lock that onto a bird in flight is almost virtually impossible. You've got to be very specific on where you place the focus point on a fast-moving subject. The large group one activates a large portion of the frame, and as the bird flies through that block, you hit your focus and it locks onto that. I find my success rate when it comes to birds in flight increases dramatically when I use this group option. Now, on certain cameras, you can find a custom menu to access your focus points very quickly. I have mine set up that I just cycle through to the various focus points. I use about 5 different ones, and I can quickly maneuver through them for the specific subject in front of me at that given moment. If it's birds in flight, I go to the group. If it's an animal walking through grass, I go to the pinpoint. If it's general wildlife, I go to the large group of 9 points. And that helps me get a consistently high level of sharpness throughout my photography. Back button focus and continuous focus. Now, I know people are on both sides of the fence here, but here's my reasoning behind why this is such a critical part of good wildlife photography. Firstly, if you have your camera in continuous focus, it means that whenever the subject is moving, the camera will track with that. If you have back button focus, you can change that and morph it to your desires by having continuous focus, single focus, and manual focus without having to change a button at any time. The first option is single focus. You find a subject, you focus on it with your back button, you release the back button, and you recompose and you take a photograph. So it works as a single focus option. If that subject decides to then move towards you or run around, you put your back button on and it tracks that subject. So now it's continuous focus. So without having to change any settings on the camera, I am now continually focusing on my camera. I'm capturing all the action, I'm catching all the movement. And then if I want to photograph stars at night, I just manually focus my camera and take the picture without touching any of the back button options. So it's manual focus it's continuous focus, and it's single or spot focus all in one. And with wildlife photography, the less you have to fiddle on your camera, the better. And this has become critical in working quickly to take portrait shots, and then if that portrait starts moving or running, or maybe a leopard jumps on top of that portrait and there's a lot of action, I can hit the back button, get the action as the subjects are moving through the frame. The fourth technique for great wildlife photography is a very simple one. Danielle Carstens has spoken at length about it, so do go and watch her video about it. Exposure compensation. Underexposing and overexposing your camera and your scenes in front of you is very important, A, just for good exposure and good histograms, but B, for your creative side to really come to the fore. And with mirrorless cameras these days, it's so nice to be able to see that as you underexpose an image in your screen, you physically see the image going darker or physically see it going brighter. I like to have the histogram in my frame, and I don't do that specifically to keep a bell-shaped histogram. I have it there to see that as I'm underexposing, how much of my image is black. I'm a creative photographer, and I sometimes want a lot of my scene to be very dark, or alternatively, I want some of the image to be blown out and white. And so therein lies the rub, is that you have this now visual control over your photograph, and over and underexposing on the fly as you photograph is a great way to just tweak your image and actually get visual confirmation of your creative input to your file. In the film days, almost impossible. You were under and overexposing, but you were blind to the view. With mirrorless cameras, it's transformed that, and that has really helped us to be as creative as we need to be. And lastly, it's your frames per second. Now, many people think, oh, well, we should just photograph at a very high frame rate. But trust me, that kills your post-production workload and really puts a lot of pressure on you to select through multiple photographs. With wildlife photography, we take a lot of images just by default. And so I want to reduce that so that I'm selecting only the best images through the scenes itself. And the way I do that is continuously adjust my frames per second. On my cameras, I set it up, I can either go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and but a second button, I can jump up from 8 to 10 to 20 frames per second very quickly, just by 2 clicks of my dial. My default is 4 frames a second. That's quite slow for many wildlife photographers, but I like to be more selective over what I photograph. If I foresee any type of action, just recently, this last week, we had lions interacting with each other, big male lions coming to attack 4 other lions that are on a kill. I immediately, as I saw that, I ramped up my frame rate to 20 frames a second. The lions charged, and I got a whole sequence of the lions at 20 frames a second, because there is nothing more powerful on the African plains than a lion in full charge. And in that moment, you want to capture every single detail and every frame that you can get. The same goes for birds in flight. When they are flying or there's interaction of birds, they move so quickly that you need to capture them at 20 frames a second or more if your camera allows for that. But I do not want to be photographing a portrait of an elephant at 20 frames a second. I want to be more selective in what I'm actually photographing. And so there, I'm going right down to 5 or 6 frames per second. As the trunk curls and it's putting the food into the mouth, I want to select those shots. I don't want to be blindly blasting away. And so for you to move that about gives you a lot of freedom in what you're photographing, but also makes you a selective photographer. It makes you a more considered photographer. We're not spray and pray as wildlife photographers. We are considered about what we are photographing. And changing frame rate helps that a great deal. These days, again, with these new cameras, we can go from 1 frame a second all the way up to 20, even 30 frames a second on some of these cameras. And so you're selecting that and changing that very quickly on your cameras is really critical. After 70 days of field work this year, these are my 5 tips for setting up and implementing into your wildlife photography. I trust that they will really help you get consistently good photographs as you are out in the field. Thank you for watching. Please come and join me on safari and we can work on these tips together. Thank you. Goodbye.